The room didn't erupt when Tamar spoke. It stopped. No yelling. No chaos. Just one sentence that landed so heavy it sucked the air out of the conversation. According to people close to the situation, Tamar revealed something that instantly shifted the balance. She claimed there was a possibility no one was prepared for. And the moment her words reached Mendeecees, everything changed. His response wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Sources say Mendeecees didn't argue, didn't deny, didn't explain. Instead, he allegedly made one demand that stunned everyone listening: a DNA test. No discussion. No negotiation. Just a line drawn in real time, turning a private situation into a potential public reckoning. What made it even more explosive was the timing. This came after a statement that many already found confusing, one that Tamar reportedly felt minimized her side of the story. She didn't respond immediately. She waited. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't to clear rumors. It was to change the narrative entirely. People in the room say Tamar looked calm, but resolute. Like someone who had already accepted that once this was said out loud, there was no going back. And Mendeecees' reaction only confirmed one thing. Whatever the truth is, it's serious enough that neither side is willing to rely on trust alone anymore. Because when DNA gets mentioned, the situation is already beyond damage control. And this bomb? It may have just started something neither of them can walk away from. Long before the words DNA test were ever spoken, the emotional groundwork had already been laid. Tamar's history with trust, vulnerability, and public judgment made moments like this heavier than they needed to be. She had spent years navigating situations where her truth was questioned, reframed, or overshadowed by louder narratives. Over time, that taught her a hard lesson. If you don't speak carefully, your story will be told for you. The connection between Tamar and Mendeecees didn't exist in a vacuum. It was shaped by timing, proximity, and emotional overlap, periods when boundaries weren't as clear as they should have been, and communication left room for interpretation. Tamar has always been open about how complicated emotions can become when clarity is missing. She trusted feelings before facts, intuition before paperwork. That approach had brought her joy before, but it had also left her exposed. When Tamar first began to suspect something was different about her body, she didn't rush to conclusions. She waited. She observed. She tried to separate anxiety from reality. Her past had taught her that reacting too quickly invites scrutiny, and scrutiny invites doubt. So she stayed quiet longer than most people would have. Not because she was unsure, but because she understood how easily her words could be turned against her. Emotionally, this period stirred old wounds. Tamar remembered other moments when she spoke up and felt dismissed. Times when she shared something personal and was met with skepticism instead of support. Those memories influenced every decision she made now. Who to tell, what to say, when to say it. Silence felt safer than explanation. Mendeecees' history also played a role in the tension. He has always been known for drawing firm lines when situations become serious. Where Tamar processes emotionally, he tends to respond practically. That difference in coping styles mattered. Tamar hoped for conversation, reassurance, acknowledgement. Mendeecees, according to those close to him, focused on certainty and clarity. That gap widened quickly once the possibility Tamar raised entered the conversation. The emotional history here isn't just about two people, it's about how differently people respond to uncertainty. Tamar internalizes it. She sits with it. She feels it fully before speaking. Mendeecees moves to resolve it. He wants proof, timelines, answers that remove ambiguity. Neither approach is wrong, but when they collide, misunderstanding becomes inevitable. What made this especially painful for Tamar was the public context. Nothing existed purely between them anymore. Every reaction risked becoming a headline. Every pause risked interpretation. Tamar felt pressure not just to be honest, but to be precise. One misplaced word could erase her credibility entirely. That awareness weighed on her heavily. There was also fear layered beneath everything. Not fear of confrontation, but fear of being reduced to a claim instead of a person. Tamar didn't want her experience to become a debate. She wanted space to process without being dissected. But history told her that space was rarely granted once speculation started. By the time the situation escalated, Tamar's emotional state was already stretched thin. She wasn't trying to provoke a reaction. She was trying to protect herself from being erased. Speaking up felt risky, but staying silent felt worse. That internal conflict shaped the way she presented what she knew and what she didn't. This backstory matters because it explains why the moment Mendeecees demanded a DNA test hit so hard. It wasn't just about proof. It was about trust being replaced by verification, about feelings being set aside in favor of documentation. For Tamar, that shift felt like confirmation of her deepest fear, that vulnerability would once again be met with doubt. And once that fear is triggered, everything that follows becomes charged. Because when history tells you you'll be questioned, you prepare for impact long before the question is asked. The conflict truly exploded the moment Tamar realized the conversation was no longer about understanding. It was about verification. According to sources, when Tamar finally spoke up about the possibility she had been sitting with in silence, she wasn't making demands. She wasn't issuing ultimatums. She was sharing information she believed deserved seriousness and care. What she didn't expect was how quickly the tone would shift from emotional to transactional. Mendeecees' response landed like a wall going up. There was no drawn-out argument, no back and forth. Just a firm stance that reframed everything. The demand for a DNA test didn't come with anger, but it came with distance. And that distance was what hurt the most. Tamar wasn't asking to be believed without question. She was asking to be heard before conclusions were drawn. Instead, the conversation jumped straight to proof. For Tamar, that shift felt familiar in the worst way. She had been here before, speaking vulnerably only to feel like her credibility was on trial. The implication wasn't stated out loud, but it hung in the air. We need evidence. That implication stirred old wounds. It suggested doubt where she had hoped for dialogue. And once doubt enters the room, trust struggles to survive. The main conflict wasn't about the test itself. It was about what the request symbolized. To Mendeecees, a DNA test represented clarity and closure. To Tamar, it represented disbelief. Two people responding to uncertainty in completely opposite ways, each convinced they were being reasonable. That mismatch turned a sensitive moment into a standoff neither side knew how to de-escalate. Things intensified when Tamar learned that the demand wasn't just private, it was being discussed as a firm boundary. According to insiders, Mendeecees made it clear he wouldn't engage further, without confirmation. That stance hardened the situation. What might have been a careful, private process now felt like a condition. And conditions change how conversations feel. They introduce power dynamics that weren't there before. Then came the first shocking twist. Tamar reportedly revealed that she hadn't gone public or dramatic because she anticipated this reaction. She had delayed speaking precisely because she feared being reduced to a claim instead of a person. Hearing that reframed the conflict. It wasn't impulsive. It was cautious. Tamar wasn't trying to force belief. She was trying to avoid spectacle. The irony was brutal. The restraint she exercised ended up creating the exact tension she hoped to prevent. The twist deepened when Tamar addressed the timing. The demand for a DNA test came immediately after a statement that she felt minimized her perspective. That sequence mattered. It made her feel like her words were being weighed against optics rather than considered on their own merit. For someone already navigating fear and uncertainty, that realization was destabilizing. Emotionally, Tamar felt cornered. Agreeing to the test felt like accepting the premise that she was untrustworthy. Refusing it risked being labeled evasive. Either choice came with consequences. The conflict now wasn't just between two people, it was between narratives. And Tamar knew from experience how unforgiving public narratives can be once they form. Mendeecees, for his part, felt justified. According to those close to him, he believed clarity was the only way to prevent the situation from spiraling. In his mind, verification was an accusation. It was protection. Protection of himself, his family, and the truth. That belief made compromise difficult. When two people believe they are protecting themselves, Neither feels obligated to yield. The room around them felt the shift immediately. What began as a serious conversation hardened into something colder. Words were chosen carefully. Pauses stretched longer. The emotional temperature dropped as the practical stakes rose. Tamar realized that once the conversation moved into procedural territory, there was no returning to emotional safety. By the end of this phase, the conflict had crystallized into a single, unavoidable reality. Trust had been suspended pending proof. That suspension changed everything. It reframed the relationship, the conversation, and the potential outcomes. Tamar wasn't just dealing with uncertainty anymore, she was dealing with disbelief. The first shocking twist wasn't the demand itself. It was the realization that once verification replaces trust, even the truth, whatever it turns out to be, can arrive too late to repair the damage. And with that realization, the situation crossed a line that neither side could uncross. Because from this point forward, every step would be documented, measured, and interpreted, leaving no room for the kind of understanding Tamar had hoped for when she finally chose to speak. Once the words DNA test entered the conversation, the situation escalated in ways neither side could fully control. What had begun as a sensitive exchange instantly became structured, conditional, and tense. The emotional air shifted. Conversations that once carried nuance now felt monitored, as if every sentence needed to be defensible later. Tamar felt that change immediately. The warmth she hoped for never arrived. Instead, everything felt formal, cautious, and distant. The escalation didn't happen through shouting or public scenes. It happened through silence. Messages slowed. Calls became brief. Questions were answered with statements instead of reassurance. Tamar sensed that the space between them was growing, not because of anger, but because both sides were bracing for impact. When clarity becomes the goal, patience often disappears. Outside voices made everything worse. People close to both parties began offering advice, each perspective pulling the situation in a different direction. Some urged Tamar to comply immediately, arguing that proof would end speculation. Others warned her that rushing into verification could strip her of dignity and control. The noise was relentless, and it made her feel like the situation was no longer hers to manage. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them lived with the consequences the way she did. Then came the second major twist. According to sources, Tamar learned that the demand for a DNA test wasn't just about certainty, it was also about timing. Mendeecees wanted resolution fast. Not because he doubted everything she said, but because lingering uncertainty threatened his stability. That urgency reframed the demand. It wasn't just a boundary. It was a deadline. And deadlines, in emotional situations, create pressure that rarely leads to understanding. Tamar felt that pressure acutely. The expectation to move quickly made her feel rushed through something deeply personal. She hadn't even finished processing her own emotions, yet she was being asked to provide answers on someone else's schedule. That imbalance became impossible to ignore. The escalation wasn't loud, but it was suffocating. The situation intensified when Tamar realized how the narrative was beginning to shift. People started framing the story around his demand rather than her experience. The focus moved away from what she had shared and toward how she would respond. That shift felt erasing. Tamar wasn't just waiting for the next step. She was watching her voice fade from the center of her own story. Emotionally, she wrestled with conflicting instincts. Part of her wanted to agree immediately, just to stop the bleeding, to end the questions, to regain control. Another part of her resisted, sensing that compliance under pressure would feel like surrender rather than resolution. The escalation forced her to confront a hard truth. Clarity achieved at the cost of self-respect isn't clarity at all. The second twist deepened when Tamar privately acknowledged something she hadn't said out loud yet. Even if the test resolved everything cleanly, the way this moment was handled had already changed the relationship. Trust doesn't reset with paperwork. Feelings don't disappear with results. The process itself had become part of the damage. As this realization settled in, Tamar's demeanor shifted. She became quieter, not withdrawn, but deliberate. She stopped reacting and started choosing. Every word was weighed. Every decision slowed. That calm wasn't acceptance. It was resolve. She understood now that the escalation wasn't just about an answer. It was about how power was being negotiated in real time. Mendeecees, sensing the pause, stood firm. From his perspective, clarity was still the priority. He believed the test would either confirm or close the chapter, allowing everyone to move forward. What he didn't fully account for was how the process had already reshaped the emotional terrain. Even a clear result wouldn't erase the memory of being questioned at a moment of vulnerability. By the end of this stage, the escalation had reached a critical point. Lines were drawn. Expectations set. The situation could no longer be softened with conversation alone. Whatever came next would have consequences beyond the immediate question. It would define how both sides remembered this moment forever. The second major twist wasn't about new information. It was the realization that resolution, when rushed, can still leave wreckage behind. And once that realization took hold, the story moved into a phase where every outcome, clear or unclear, carried weight. Because now it wasn't just about the truth. It was about what the pursuit of that truth was costing both of them. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It unfolded slowly, quietly, in ways that were impossible to ignore if you were paying attention. Tamar's energy shifted first. She stopped engaging the way she normally did. Her voice softened. Her presence pulled back. People who knew her well noticed it immediately. This wasn't avoidance. It was self-protection. Publicly, the narrative began to form without her. Once the words DNA test were out there, the story took on a life of its own. People debated timelines, intentions, motives. Some framed the demand as reasonable. Others saw it as cold and dismissive. Very few stopped to ask how Tamar was actually handling the weight of it all. Her silence was interpreted as strategy, when in reality, it was exhaustion. Emotionally, Tamar felt exposed in a new way. This wasn't just about being questioned, it was about feeling reduced to a scenario instead of being treated like a person in the middle of uncertainty. She struggled with the idea that vulnerability had once again been met with conditions. That realization reopened old wounds she thought had healed. Moments from her past resurfaced, times when she spoke her truth and felt doubted anyway. The pressure intensified as more people weighed in. Friends tried to be supportive, but often leaned toward advice instead of listening. Some urged her to just do the test and move on, not realizing how dismissive that sounded. Others told her to stand her ground, warning her not to let anyone control the narrative. Tamar felt pulled in every direction, each suggestion carrying its own emotional cost. Mendeecees faced public scrutiny as well. His demand was dissected endlessly. Some praised his insistence on clarity. Others criticized the timing and lack of emotional sensitivity. The public debate hardened positions on both sides, making private resolution harder. Once opinions are formed publicly, they're difficult to undo, even when facts change. The emotional fallout reached a breaking point when Tamar realized she could no longer separate her feelings from the public conversation. Every move felt watched. Every pause felt judged. She began questioning whether any outcome would actually bring peace, or whether the damage had already been done simply by how things unfolded. What hurt most wasn't the demand itself. It was the feeling that trust had been replaced with procedure at the exact moment she needed empathy. That shift lingered. Even in moments of calm, it sat beneath the surface, unresolved and heavy. By this stage, Tamar had stopped trying to explain herself. Not out of defiance, but out of preservation. She understood that clarity wouldn't come from over-explaining. It would come from choosing what she was willing to participate in and what she wasn't. That boundary marked a turning point in how she approached the situation. The fallout wasn't loud. It was isolating. And it forced Tamar to confront a painful truth. Sometimes, even when the truth eventually comes out, the way you're treated before it arrives leaves scars that don't fade easily. This phase wasn't about answers yet. It was about endurance, and whether she had the strength to protect herself while the world waited for proof. Just when it seemed like the situation had reached its emotional ceiling, the final twist arrived quietly, but it hit harder than anything before it. According to people close to Tamar, the DNA test itself was no longer the center of her decision-making. Something else had shifted. The question wasn't whether the test would happen. It was how everything had already changed because of it. Tamar reportedly came to a realization that stopped her cold. Even a clear result wouldn't undo what had already been exposed. The moment trust turned into a requirement for proof, the relationship crossed a line that couldn't simply be walked back. Verification might answer a question, but it wouldn't answer how unsupported she felt when she spoke up. That emotional gap became impossible to ignore. The twist deepened when Tamar made a choice that surprised people around her. She stopped engaging in conversations about outcomes and focused instead on boundaries. No more back and forth. No more defending her feelings. She decided that whatever happened next would happen on her terms or not at all. That wasn't defiance. It was self-preservation. Meanwhile, the silence from both sides grew louder. No updates. No clarification. Just distance. And in that distance, speculation exploded. Some assumed the delay meant something definitive. Others believed it was strategic. Very few considered the possibility that Tamar was simply protecting herself from further emotional harm. The cliffhanger arrived when Tamar reportedly shared one final thought with someone close to her. "No matter what the result is, I won't be the same." That statement reframed everything. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about acknowledging that the process itself had left a mark. Mendeecees, according to insiders, began to realize that the situation wasn't resolving the way he expected. Clarity wasn't bringing calm. The demand for certainty hadn't simplified anything, it had complicated it. And once that realization set in, it was too late to rewind the moment before the test was mentioned. The final twist wasn't a result. It was a reckoning. The understanding that some situations don't end with answers, they end with changed relationships. With trust redefined. With boundaries redrawn. With people realizing that even the pursuit of truth can cause damage if it's handled without care. The cliffhanger now looms larger than any test ever could. Will Tamar choose to proceed and close the chapter with proof, or step away entirely to protect what's left of her peace? Will Mendeecees recognize the emotional cost of how this unfolded, or double down on certainty over connection? Nothing has been confirmed yet, but one thing is clear. Whatever happens next won't just reveal the truth. It will reveal who they both choose to be once the truth is no longer the question. And that decision is still hanging in the air. This is where the story pauses, but not because it's over. What Tamar dropped wasn't just a bombshell about a DNA test. It was a moment that exposed how fragile trust becomes when vulnerability meets doubt. She didn't just reveal a possibility. She revealed how quickly empathy can disappear when proof is demanded before understanding. And that's what makes this situation so uncomfortable, so real, and so divisive. Now the questions aren't just about results. They're about how people respond when something serious is shared. If you were in Tamar's position, would you feel supported or questioned? Would you agree to verification immediately just to silence the noise? Or would you pause to protect your emotional well-being first? And if you were on the other side, would certainty matter more than compassion in that moment? This story forces a bigger conversation about trust versus proof, about timing, about whether demanding answers too fast can permanently damage what you're trying to protect. Tamar's silence now speaks as loudly as her words did before. And whatever choice she makes next will say everything about what she's willing to tolerate going forward. So, we want to hear from you. Do you think Mendeecees was right to demand a DNA test immediately? Or do you think the way it was handled crossed a line Tamar won't forget? Is proof enough to fix a broken moment? Or does the damage already linger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Respectfully. Honestly. This is one of those stories where there are no easy sides, only perspectives. And make sure you're subscribed, because this chapter isn't closed. If Tamar decides to speak again, or if the situation takes another turn, you'll want to be here when it happens. Because when truth, trust, and timing collide, the aftermath is never simple.